And let me be clear, I think a lot of VCs are pretty uncomfortable with how I built this business. I feel like I'm building a world. It's complex and there's lots of facets to it. And I think that's how it scales and creates change. And so I really back the way that we're building it.
In this episode, I had a wide-ranging conversation with Kylo Freeman, CEO and founder of For Them. For Them is a company that creates safe and effective chest binders for the trans and non-binary community, while also working to build a supportive ecosystem around its customers. They're profitable, have more than 8,000 members, and no signs of slowing down. Kylo is a fascinating human, a shrewd operator, and worth listening to. They combine left and right brain thinking as a creative visionary in their work at For Them, as an actor with appearances on hit shows like The Blacklist and Inventing Anna, while also having a background as a CFO. They are truly a Renaissance human and an independent thinker.
Well, thanks for agreeing to do a podcast with me. I appreciate it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
One thing that I was curious about when I was doing the research for this and looking at your background was just how did you get into this? Because you were first in advisory at PwC, right? Mm-hmm. Like very much on the finance side, and then working as a CFO. And then I think there was a period at PreHype and then this.
Right.
What was the...
Yeah, let me think. So my real step into being a founder was definitely PreHype. I got into their ecosystem through my finance work, a CFO for them. And then I begged and crawled and tried my best to be an entrepreneur in residence. Yeah. They let me do that. I was at PreHype building businesses and trying to figure out what I wanted to build and what problem I wanted to solve.
And were you acting the whole time, or was that something that you got into later in life?
No, I started acting really late. I was 24, I think, when I went to acting school. I say really late-ish. To be honest, it's funny because the finance work and everything I did on the corporate side after starting acting school was solely just to make money. I was like, I'm a poor actor, actors need money. Yeah. How can I do this in New York? It's really expensive. But then I started working with PreHype and it lit a fire under me. And I realized that business building is just solving problems that really matter. And I started For Them.
Was there any like specific business you saw or something like that that lit that fire when you were at PreHype?
There's so many inspirational businesses in that spot. Life, who owns public.com, I watched him build that from scratch to what it is now, which is incredible to watch. Also Roman Health, Zach and Rob, and BarkBox, of course, that was the original.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
How many ideas were there before For Them?
More than I'd like to say. A lot of ideas. I guess I got lost in this idea that there are so many problems to solve. And so I was just running and testing out all of these ideas. I had a lot of passion for some of them, but Henrik kept teaching me and resetting me to, do you care about this problem? And do you want to work on this for 8 years or more? Yeah. And it's funny because the answer to that mostly is no, you know? I think that's an interesting thing to think about. It's, do you want to work on this problem every single day for a really long time? And I just couldn't say yes to that until I found For Them, which actually came out. But ultimately, it was my problem. And I think that's what you have to connect with. Is this a really sticky, hard problem for you? And then you'll have the sort of energy to wake up every day and solve it.
Were all the problems or most of the problems that when you were in that kind of ideation stage, were most of them problems that you experienced, or were they across the map?
Some of them were. I tried to find problems that I'd experienced. It's funny, when they're a little less authentic, when you're trying to find a problem and you're like, oh, how can this scale? And you think about, what's the scalability of this? Is it venture backable? Are the people going to care about this? You start to step away from the real problem that needs to be solved. And I feel like I made that mistake over and over. I was like, okay, what's a really big problem? I kept thinking about that. And then I came up with a scalable couples therapy app, which I don't even think I was in a relationship at the time. So not my problem. What else did I come up? A finance, focused, my background was finance. So I was like, I should probably scale an accounting SaaS. And I figured it out and did that. And it looked pretty good and it worked, but I didn't really care. So that was a bad idea. And I just kept resetting until I basically gave up and just said, what do I actually care about with no other parameters at play? And I was like, my chest bind is pretty rubbish and I can't breathe, so maybe I should just start there.
Was there a close second, or when you had that moment, was it just obvious to you that was the problem?
There was no close second. It was just that, I think. Yeah, and I think the guys at PreHype really encouraged me. When I told them that was my main problem every day and how much of an actual problem it was, they were like, hey, what are you doing? You should have solved that. That's what like entrepreneurship is. So yeah, there was no close second at that point.
When you had that realization and kind of decided like, okay, this is it, what were those sort of first steps in the early days?
I guess what Opuscope does now, right? It's like, once you figure out this is my problem, the next question is this everyone else's problem in my community? And so I did a few customer demand testing around my friends. Is this a problem for you guys? What do you think we should do to solve it? Finding a bit more information. But then eventually you have to do that outside of your community. So it's, how do you do that? How do you find leads that you don't know to really validate that this is a problem? And so we ran a few paid ads essentially to get some leads in.
I was listening to an interview you did, I think it was with Nicholas,
cool.
About the customer research in the early days. What was that like? It sounded like you were doing all kinds of interesting stuff to figure out what direction to go with the product and that sort of thing. How does that work with a physical product?
Totally. It's hard, right? Because you want to ask, the easiest way to think about it is create a survey and ask people a bunch of questions. That can be tough because are people aware of what solutions that they want? What if that solution doesn't exist? It's really tough. So you dive into the actual issue, ask them what they're feeling. Nothing can really replace, in my opinion, an audio customer interview with a non-biased interviewer. I think that's important too. So I often didn't do the interviews because my questions might be a little leading, right? They're like, right, our chest finders are really bad, right? Which doesn't really create real customer demand testing. So we had someone really independent, non-biased, ask the same question to 100 customers, however many, and find out if my problem is their problem. And once those were mapped together, let's start to tease out how we might be able to solve it. But to your point, with a physical product, how do you do that? It's pretty risky, super expensive to start doing product development. And so I sort of hacked this. I essentially called all my customers, my potential customers up, and I said, what chest binder are you using right now? And they would tell me and they would rate it. I said, rate it for me between 1 and 10. Let's say they gave it a 4. Then I'd say, okay, I promise you I can find you a binder that is better than a 4. And I would go out I bought every single binder on the market. I rated them for comfortability, breathability, size, price, and created my own sort of little matrix of everything on the market. And then I looked at what they had, I tried to improve it, and I resold them a binder. Or essentially I gave them a binder for free and I sold them a service. And through that process, I not only made the customers a little bit happier because maybe they shifted from a 4 to an 8, but I also really started to understand what was missing because, yeah, a 4 to an 8 is good, but how do I get them to a 10? And then I started to really hone in on, okay, if I build something and invest in product development, I know exactly what it's for, how to get people from an 8 to a 10, and ultimately spin on a real problem that needs to be solved.
And so you have these 100 people that you're talking to, and did you have a spreadsheet and there had all these reasons, like person A gives you, this is why it's a 4 out of 10, person B, this is why it's a 4 out of 10, so on and so forth. And then you were just like mixing and matching and finding out like what the sort of overlap in the Venn diagram was.
Exactly. A table.
Your table makes the world go round. And so those 100 people, you said paid ads. Were they all paid ads or were some of them direct people that you knew? Or
I think for those first customers, they were all paid ads. I really wanted them to be at least 1 to 2 to 3 people removed from me because I wanted to understand if it was worth me spending my time on this and if it was something that people really wanted. I think it's tough to interview people that you know and that care about you around a problem. You want to make sure that it's a legit thing to solve.
Yeah, that makes sense. How did you find that person? Is that like a service or did you just ask someone that you were working with conduct these interviews, or how did that work?
Yeah, we just paid someone through freelancer through PreHype. I think they're an actor actually, so just someone that can read a script.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then, so once you had the Airtable, how many key points did you hone in on to then make the first for them binder?
Yeah, so then if you think about it, then I've sent a bunch of binders to, I think, 50 or so people. So I have this Airtable now of all the problems, which by the way, I think I bucketed them into 4 or 5 issues, so not a lot. And I checked myself and said, okay, is it worth me making a new version of these? Or is this the product? Is this service the product, right? Because clearly there's an education piece. It's not easy to find out what binder could fit your body. And at this point, My database is telling me exactly what I can say. This person's this height, they're this type of body shape, this is what they're looking for, and I could probably get them I could find them a binder on the market that was a 6 to 7. I ultimately decided with a bit of customer feedback that a 6 or a 7 is fine, but we can make it a 10, and we should make it a 10. The biggest thing was that people couldn't breathe in it for a long period of time, and that felt to me like a sticky enough issue that we should solve it with a new product. And then with that database, I had all the information I needed to go to a designer and say, this is what I'm missing, how do we make it?
And so that first designer, did you find some like bespoke small outfit that would make you a limited run, or how did you get the sort of version 1 product made?
Yeah, I read in a magazine that Misty Copeland, who's this amazing black ballerina, made a line of bras for her to dance in. I figured if she could create a bra that holds her chest in place and she can clearly breathe in it because she's dancing in it, that feels close enough to a binder. So I found the designer that did that and went to her and said, hey, you made this thing, could you make something that compresses the chest and still allows breath? Is it possible? And she said, yeah, it's possible. So she connected me with a manufacturer in New York. We all worked together to create limited-ish run, not as limited as maybe I'd like, but limited enough. We'd raised a little bit of capital by then as well because I'd validated the idea, and they made a small run for me. And to be honest, we still work with the manufacturer today.
It wasn't like you used this small outfit and then shifted.
They've scaled with us, which is really rare and interesting. A big part of our growth was in the pandemic, and so we had to figure out how do you scale with no international supply chain.
That makes sense. And how did you figure out the number for that first order? Or was it just we have a budget and we're going to get however many we get with the budget?
A bit of that, a bit of we have a budget, let's see how many we can get. And also because I'd raised a bit of money, but not really enough, I pre-sold, or at least I took a deposit for our first run of binders. And so they were all sold before they even hit the shelves.
Okay. And then did you go back to the 100 people that you had sampled with and were you like, rate this?
Correct, yeah.
Were you just on, you must have been like on pins and needles waiting for the review to get back. I hope it isn't a 4 out of 10.
I know, I was like, it better be a 10 or a 9. Yeah, exactly.
I assume they came back like, this is way better, or...
Yeah, we had overwhelming, amazing feedback that was like super emotional, to be honest. People were calling us, crying, we've changed their lives. It was really intimate, which really spurred me on for the next stage. I was like, okay, we got to do this. It's important, and it's genuinely making a difference.
Yeah, because to your point, talking about the breathing, something that you talked about in that same interview with Nicholas was like prioritizing the product safety. And that I think you got some pushback on that from some people, right? Where they were like, this isn't what I want. And you were like, okay, go find another one.
100%. So I think for the biggest thing when you're starting something is like, what is your differentiator? For us, I learned so hard into this is safe. It's funny because I definitely learned a bunch because I thought that is the most incredible differentiator. Yeah. Everyone's going to love this. Everyone wants to be safe. Everyone wants to have breath. But the truth is, for this specific product, there's a bit of education or a bit of expectation setting around that because, yeah, folks were like, no, I don't want breath. I just want it to be as bound as physically possible. And so then we pivoted a little, not with the product, but around our messaging and started talking about the maximum safe bind. It's like, how compressed can you be while still being physically safe in your body? And I think once people understood that a little bit more, they were happy to go with our product versus another.
And did you get like some doctors or some medical professionals to quantify that, or how does something like that work?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we spoke to a bunch of doctors that are non-binary or trans, and so really understand this type of product. But essentially, it's, you shouldn't wear a binder for more than 6 to 8 hours at max. And they were finding that folks that were either wearing binders longer than that or were not moving with the body like ours does, is that over time it was creating like true change in their skeletal muscle and scary things like that. And so these doctors had a good idea of like how much compression can one take in the chest for how long, and we sort of worked backwards from that.
Another thing that I guess in line with a lot of what we've been talking about with the product safety and is, especially in our world with the digital optimization stuff, certainly it can feel very black and white. Okay, let's just optimize for the higher conversion in the thing and let's do whatever the experiment is and let's let the data show what to do. And I understood that you took a different approach on that, like with stuff like the sizing, for example, where it probably would have been a lot easier to make it small, medium, large, right?
Yeah.
Was there some epiphany moment where you realized, okay, we need to prioritize the community over, or these sort of bigger, more important goals over the short-term sort of sales and conversion? Was it like, did you know that from day one? Like, how did you get to that sort of philosophical position?
Totally. It's a great question. I feel like that's been my whole journey as an entrepreneur since I've started for them, because starting something that is so mission driven and connected to my identity, there's a level of care here that is very extreme, I would say. And so I'm constantly, especially taking venture capital, right? It's like, sure, we want to grow, we want to be efficient, want to reach as many people as possible, I want multiples in my valuation, but I won't do it at the expense of our whole community. But I need to find a balance, because we're a business, we're profitable, we need to create scale. And so how do you do that? So I feel like I sort of check in with myself all the time, and my team keeps me really true to this, I think. I feel like I sit right in the middle of all these stakeholders and investors and my team and the customer. And I have to keep this wonderful balance of, we need to be mission driven, we need to be accessible in terms of pricing, we need to provide education when we can, but also we have to make the business work, we need to be profitable, we need to scale. So honestly, I just think that's my job, to keep all those things in balance. And I believe I've failed if I don't manage that.
Yeah. Was the sizing, like, that's the kind of one example that I'm aware of. Was that the biggest one, or are there a lot of those kinds of forks in the road where you've had to make a very clear decision on path A, path B?
I think the sizing is a big one, because it creates friction where traditionally there isn't friction. And so that was a tough decision, but I felt like we would connect and be more, we would create more intimacy with the customer by doing it. And we were right about that, I think. And that has paid off over time for sure. Another good example, though, I think, is pricing. We've found a bit of scale now, and now we have gross margin. But the truth is, when we launched, we were making no money from each individual unit of product, which I think is a bold decision, right? For us, we were always trying to scale into something that was truly an ecosystem. And so for me, the binder is just one sort of wedge product into the whole community. And so I made a bet that, okay, this is a utility product, it's important to the community, people care about it. How accessible can I make this, especially given that we care about safety? And then connecting with the customer in that way, how can I then scale and use that sort of, I basically just use the binder as a customer acquisition tool. And then how can I boost LTV through that? And I think that's what we've done. And that's why our business model, I think, is a little bit different than most product businesses, at least, because we're not really trying to get profitable from that first product, but rather our second or our third or our fourth or a recurring product after that.
When you made that decision the first time on the first binder, did you know that there was going to be a community aspect to it later? Or did you just think, oh, like we might sell hats at some point or something?
Totally. So we've always built community next to the product. We didn't always monetize it, but we started actually on Discord, and every single person that we sold to, I funneled them directly into a Discord server. And then we would all chat and talk about sizing and returns, and we did everything through there. And so we've always had this community element. I didn't know then that we were going to monetize it and create this sort of subscription. The essence has been there.
Building community is something that's really interesting to me, obviously in a different space, but it's something that I'm thinking about too. Like, how did you get the first, in this Discord, let's say, how did you get the first 100 people?
Yeah, I prioritized, if you think about now what folks do in the e-commerce world, they acquire a customer, they sell them a thing, and they send them an email confirmation, and they send them the product. And then they have their email address, and then they like ping them again, maybe 2 weeks later, and email them again 2 weeks after that, and start to funnel them into a space. We cut that short at first. So I would literally, after they clicked, yes, I would like to buy this, we would have a pop-up that would be like, come and hang out in the Discord server, we'll drop your tracking link to you there. And we funneled them straight in and prioritized it, and just had this bet that people would take that extra step to go and check it out. And then we made sure that when they landed there, that they had something to interact with. And so that's how we did it at first. I think now, though, what's interesting is that I was wrong, I think, because at first I thought we're going to have this Discord server or equivalent wherever it sits, and people are going to like connect with each other, and we're going to have this beautiful engaged space. And the truth is, one, that didn't really create safety or like fun for the customer. It was like pretty trauma bondy, I would say. Over time, now have this sort of next gen version of community, and it's split across our content, our social, one-to-one sort of intimate moments with the customer, and we're building this idea of community in a slightly different way.
Who managed that community in the first days? Was that you or?
Me and our first few team members. It was really hard. Like, moderation is a real beast, you know.
Yeah. And did you have, I know Discord, like a lot of Discord groups, they'll have like different channels for different things. Did you have some sort of idea of the architecture of it, for lack of a better word, at the outset? Or was it just there's one general chat and everyone goes and chats and then you added more?
No, we had like real structure around the Discord, lots of different channels. We had experts come in and do like lives and speak to folks. It was like really structured, which I felt like it needed to be, you know. I realized after 3 or 4 iterations of this Discord server, I realized that community is it's so difficult, but when you dig into why it's difficult, it's really because you need to be the space. You need to be the sort of curator of the space. And I think people don't realize that. It's not difficult driving people to a place, but it is difficult holding and curating the space for them. And I think that's what people are missing these days in community. People don't just want to talk to each other. They want facilitated interactions that make them feel better in some way. And I think that's what we're trying to do in this decentralized space of for them's community now. And
was this the sort of first community that you built, or had you done this before, like at PreHype when you were?
Yeah, actually, I built an actors community before in the pandemic. I found that, again, it was just my own problem. I found that actors were suddenly out of work and very bored and feeling lonely and not inspired. And so I actually scaled a community. I think we had 500 or so members, and we would do these. I based it all around these sort of play readings every single week. I learned a lot from that because I learned that routine and repetitive behavior is really good in a community. I think that we often think that you need a bunch of different stuff. It's like the bundling problem. It's like you have all of these things and actually people just want one of them. And so it unlocked for me that people just want 1 or 2 things, and you can provide those to them on repeat pretty consistently. And that is community. That's it, you know.
Is there anything that you've found that's, I can't think of a better word than like rule? Is there anything that you've seen different? I'm sure you've seen tried tons of different things inside of, let's say, like this Discord. And you were talking about how people want some degree of like structure or input from whoever is the host of this. Is there anything that comes to mind as far as what types of things the community resonates more with or tend to get? However you measure success inside of a community, right? Like whether it's engagement or so on. Have you found anything that really correlates positively to that in terms of a specific action, or is it very dependent on the community?
I think for better or worse, our community has very high standards. And for us, the only real thing that works is asking them what they need and doing that in an authentic and intimate way. And so our challenge this entire time since inception is, how do we scale intimacy? And we've done that in a bunch of different ways, but I think that's our unlock. It's being able to do that, create that connection and that sense of authenticity at scale. And we do that in a bunch of different ways, but that's our sort of key, you know.
I'm always really interested in experiences in people's past and then how those influence the thing that they're doing today. And like you said, this is a problem that's very close to home for you. You're solving your own problem. It's very community driven. And then you also have this like CFO brain from your background there. And even when you're talking about like these gross margin decisions in the early days, it's how do you balance this very calculated operator mindset with building a community where you're not just ruthlessly optimizing, right? Because otherwise you'd clearly make very different decisions. How do you reconcile and balance that day to day?
I guess the answer to that is my team.
Okay.
I try and build and hire around me in a very specific way. I am a multifaceted person, but I think that we all lean into one direction more than the other. For me, I lean into creative, innovative, wild decision making, which is why my CFO experience is helpful. But my first hire, who was chief of staff and then COO and then CMO, this is my sort of right-hand person, and she leans operational and unit economics and thinking about structure. And so I think that is the most important thing, to have your C-suite or whoever is around you to create that balance for you, so that you can hear, I see my role as this person that sits in the seat and hears everybody's opinion, everybody's data, everybody's experience of what we should do, and then weighs all those up and hopefully makes the right decision for the business. So that's how I've gotten around that. I have these team members that hold me accountable to balance.
And are you, when you think about making decisions like that, or whether now or in the early days, and maybe it's changed, are you a big planner? Are you thinking many months ahead or quarters ahead, or is it in a shorter time frame?
I'm not a big planner. I'm a sprinter.
Yeah.
And I feel like I get these like wild creative ideas and they hit me, and then I'm obsessed with them, and then I just sprint at them and figure out if they're going to work. And if they do, I pass them off to the team to build. And if they don't work, then I drop them. And I feel like that's my energy. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it's certainly what I bring to the table.
With that approach, like when you were hiring the first 10 people, were you trying to find, how would I put it, like more type, I hate to say executive, right? It sounds so like stodgy, but were you trying, I feel like you can either hire someone that you're bringing on this more senior person, not necessarily that the seniority is the driver, but this person that is going to like, here, go build this thing, versus
right.
finding someone that's like an individual contributor and then having bottom up versus top down. Is there any thought process around that? Or
I think naturally my first few hires were people that are self-starters and either had their own companies or could build stuff themselves. That's just what I gravitated towards. But I think learning over time, it's understanding what your weaknesses are and then filling those holes with people that can really do that. And for me, that is that more structured mindset that can hold me accountable to sort of, I guess, hold me accountable at scale. Because what I am good at is building from scratch, 0 to 1, finding an idea, figuring out what to do with it. And we iterate and do that over and over again in the business. But eventually we need to find scale in a way that works. And so a lot of my close members of my team now are people that help me structure that in a scalable way that works, globally for the customer. And I think that's important.
So you're looking for someone that's a builder, it sounds like.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
How do you convince builders to come take a job?
I'm a little bit of a sales human.
Okay.
I think, naturally. Yeah, but that is a challenge. I think that's part of the gig. If you're a founder and a CEO, it's how do you get people to come along, sit in this boat with you and row with you and drive towards this mission? That's the job, to find those people and to be able to sell to them. I think that's the same skill set as raising money from VCs or recruitment or speaking to hundreds of customers and helping them understand your product. Is all the same skill. Where
did you learn that, like the sales bit?
I think certainly acting school helped, giving me confidence, gravitas, being able to articulate my point. But I think that's just in me a little bit. I get very passionate about things, and I think it's that passion that sort of brings everyone together and gets people feeling excited. It's something I pride myself on anyway.
Do you think that is now in this stage for them, could you point to a specific skill or talent and say, that's the one that makes me good at this? Or do you think it's the balance of all the different things?
I think it's probably the balance.
Sorry, I'm forcing some like self-analysis.
No, I think it's probably the balance. I think it's interesting. I look at Zuck and I think, okay, that guy's gone from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
Like he has had to, I assume, iterate and change the type of CEO and leader who is on the way. Mm-hmm. I challenge myself, of course, when I'm at 100, but I know that I'm a good leader and founder from 0 to 1. And so what does that look like 1 to 5? And what attributes do I need to keep and lean into, and which do I need to maybe pull back on? I think about that a lot. And I think the wild, creative leader is great, but maybe not scalable. And so I have to look in the mirror on that and think about next steps.
You come back to this topic of this wild creative leader, and I'm curious, like when you were at PwC, financial advisory.
Yeah.
Was this like this unleashed beast within, or did it come later in life, or what was that like? That's such a buttoned up environment, I must imagine, right?
They moved me around a lot, to be honest. But I have to give them credit that they moved me around a lot. I say that with a full heart. I think that they saw that I was really creative and a little bit wild and thought outside the box a little bit. And so they allowed me to do that. I started an audit, which is not very think outside the box. You certainly shouldn't be coloring outside, you know, the lines at all. But then I asked him, I said, I'm not sure about this is right for me. And I asked to move, and they moved me, and I was in deals, and that felt a little bit more salesy and a little bit more creative. And it was really client forward, and I was good at that. And so they did a good job, at least within the parameters of a Big Four firm, to give me space to move. But ultimately, yeah, I don't think it was certainly not my zone of genius. But I'm so grateful for what I learned in that time. I think about all the things that I learned and how they're literally the bedrock of building a company. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, because you were not there a short amount of time. It was not like...
No, I was not. They were very... Firstly, when you go for the graduate scheme, you commit to being there for 3 years.
Okay.
And you become an accountant and you get this amazing qualification. And so at the end of the 3 years, you decide, do I want to stay or do I want to go? And when I was making that decision, they gave me an option to move into deals. And at the time I thought, that sounds really cool, like an investment banking kind of lens. And it was cool for a little bit. And then I got itchy feet.
Do you find that's like a little bit of a hidden superpower now? I don't know how many people are scrolling your LinkedIn, but if you're coming in with this like creative genius mindset approach, I feel like people will expect a certain thing, and it's usually not like, I can walk you through a discounted cash flow model.
Yeah, I still don't think I can walk you through a discounted cash flow, but yeah. I think when it shows up the most is when I'm pitching, because I suppose I get on calls with VCs and they certainly have a view of me as, you know, they make a gut reaction. And I'm usually dressed in a certain way with my hat on and saying all these things about, you know, about how wild and interesting and expansive Gen Z are. And they feel like I'm a little wild, and they can see it, you know, they know I'm an actor, and they know that I have a production company, and they see all these things. And then so I always put my background on slides, and then they see that, and then there's always this sort of like
artistic tension.
Yes, where they always ask me about it because they can't quite believe that I used to be there. It's interesting though. I think that those archaic industries that are really structured do really well with dropping in more creative, wild minds. So I was glad that I was there for a bit, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that. I started my career in finance in a derivatives trading desk. Cool. And I feel like finance rightly or wrongly gets a bad rap, right? It's kind of a meme when people are like, you have these, what are those? There's like those parties where I remember hearing about this at some point, but it's like artists, entrepreneurs, not finance. They're not allowed to go if you're a finance person.
Yeah, you're not allowed into Soho House if you're a finance guy.
Yeah, exactly. But then on the other hand, having been in that setting, there's some aspects of it where I'm like, wow, like we could learn so much on communication from being on like a trading desk, on clarity of communication and speaking clearly. Absolutely. And not getting offended. And it's interesting when you talk to someone, you peel back the curtain a little bit, and like the perception is the reality is very different from, I think, the common perception, I guess.
Totally.
But so you have this kind of like, you're like a Renaissance person with this really wide background on creative side, but then also very analytical, and you start this company for them, and you had this period where you're doing this very scrappy customer research, but also very diligent and systematic with a laser focus, it sounds like, to really know like what the product is, decrease uncertainty. Once you had figured all that out and built the foundation, and you started selling the first product, selling the first binder, you're in this period where you talked about where it's like you're intentionally running it at a 0% gross margin because you know we're close to grow the business. How did you handle that initial scaling? Like the first 3 months or 6 months, what was that experience like? My
first sort of understanding of scale came from, okay, I've always looked at sort of blended CAC as my thing, because we have really strong organic, but I don't believe that we can do it with organic alone. And look, I feel a certain way about paid ads. I think that there's absolutely space for them, and I know not everybody does, but For us, I basically wanted to pressure test that first year. How big can I get this profitably using a combination of paid acquisition and organic? And so I really pressure tested it that first after launch. I was basically, my challenge to self was how many binders can I sell each month? What's the absolute maximum I can sell? And I pressure tested that until I hit a place where we were basically acquiring at a loss to understand, okay, what is the limits and what do I do next? And is that sell another product to the same customer? Is it start to monetize the community? Is it to do better on organic and try to hire someone like you to figure out, can we scale at this cost? But that was my first point of call, because the truth is I didn't know. I think the biggest question that a founder should have, especially around physical product, is what is that top limit? I think we just assume that we're just going to be able to keep selling and selling, but CAC increases and increases, and at some point it doesn't make any sense. And so I wanted to build a company that was profitable and scalable. I had to understand where that ceiling was.
So if you're thinking about things in terms of blended CAC, I'd imagine you're probably not trying to move too many variables at once. Was paid spend the big toggle, or what were you, as you were doing this kind of experimental phase, for lack of, I don't know if you'd describe it differently, but what was the thing that you were moving?
Yeah, so totally. At first, it was how good can we get at organic? And so I would keep our paid ads essentially the same and not change too much to see what our pushes would do. Because a lot of this stuff is, there's lots of startups these days trying to solve this, but a lot of this stuff is this black box of unknown. Yeah. You send an email out, sure, you can track that a little bit. We get a social post, we go viral. How many sales does that make? What's attributed to that? Which is why I always deal with blended, because I can't actually get to the source of what all these things are, but I can step back and look at the whole business and say, okay, I know we spent 20K on ad this month and we've done these 3 social posts and our CAC's blended at X. So we did that first, and that was me really trying to test our team of how creative can we get and how much can we push this. And then once I understand our capabilities there and really what is an amazing organic conversion and what is not so good and where do we sit on this scale, then we started really playing with paid, which is when I reached out to Overscope, because obviously that gets quite complex.
Yeah. It's interesting. The show's called Learnings at Scale, and the kind of motivation or ethos behind it, I guess, was the same as the reason we started Opuscope, which was like Alex and I didn't necessarily know what business we would go start. So it's next best thing is we can go work with all these like great operators and learn all these things, and we bring something to the table and we can be in this interesting position. But now, and Alex has been doing this a lot longer than I have, right? And for me, I've been more of an observer, because I came in a sales role. In my first 2 years, I was just like sitting on all the client calls, like listening to Alex talk, like taking notes, like get off the call and be like, what are all these acronyms? But one thing that I've noticed is that it seems like a lot of the most successful founders, marketers, they are looking at blended cost in some way, like blended CAC basically, in terms of their marketing cost. And the ones that are like shooting themselves in the foot are the ones that are doing the paralysis analysis with the attribution report. But at the same time, there's value in any data, right? It's just a matter of you take it too far and you like torture this data set far enough, you can get it to tell you whatever you want. So you have to have this embedded degree of uncertainty.
Totally.
And I'm curious, you look at blended metrics more. How deep do you also go into the specifics? The attribution reports, or like the inside a specific channel, or it doesn't have to be marketing channel specifically, but just any activity that you do.
Yeah, I think to your point, you said it, there's data everywhere, but there's very little clear data anywhere. So I try and take everything in and have access to everything and then make a gut decision around it, which sounds a little scary, but I think that I have this sort of gut understanding of my business, right? Every day I know how much is coming in. I know roughly how much we've spent. I know how many new customers we've acquired, what our repeat customer rate is. And so I can feel when things start to shift in any direction. And so I think it's that, not to sound not CFO, but honestly, for me, I have an awareness of the data, but I'm not getting trapped and doing VLOOKUPs and pivot tables. I'm trying to dig and dig. I think though, to your point on the paid ad stuff, when people get really locked into these, well, on Facebook it's converting at this amount and Google it's converting this amount, I think a lot of that, and you probably get this isn't on the agency side, is, you know, having a partner that you can trust on that side too, because it is a group activity, I think, because you can do amazing work, but you're not a miracle worker. I have to pull on the organic side. There needs to be great creative. There needs to be, you know, the product needs to be good.
Yeah.
There needs to be an understanding of how we differ from the competitors. Like I think I'm pretty good at, or I believe it's the best way to lead and build a business, to step back from everything and have a holistic view and know that all of these things contribute, but not one thing is going to make it fail.
It's like the business is not built inside of Google Ads.
Yeah, and I can imagine people are coming at you like, hey, this is the cost is going up. It's going to.
Oh my gosh, if I started venting about that, this would be a 3-hour podcast.
Exactly. The CAC is going to go up. And I find it too, because on the venture side, I get a lot of founders pitching to me and they say, hey, we've launched this business, it's really successful, and our CAC is $5. But I don't really care what anyone's CAC is, because that is not a consistent metric across time for a scalable business. It's just not, right? I have a little bit of knowledge around what does that look like at scale, but I don't think it proves a high demand business having a low CAC in the first 6 to 12 months of launching.
Right. Yeah. You can do a lot of things to influence CAC when you're early on, right? Like you could walk down the street and just start asking people to buy it, right? And like of small numbers, that's gonna, like you don't need to.
And that consumer, right, of nascent consumers and then crossing the chasm, I'm really feeling that now as a business owner, that it's just a different game, not just on the acquisition side, but marketing and customer interaction and the type of customers you're getting. Like, it completely shifts as you grow and scale a business. And so it's understanding that shift too, and how to change the levers as you get there.
That's interesting, because that's something that I'm thinking a lot about too, that like crossing the chasm. And I'm curious, like you were just talking about how you have like an intuitive sense with some of the numbers you're using. Obviously you're looking at the data, but it's not only in a spreadsheet. Have you found any breakpoints or ways that you would quantify those like different chapters in the growth where it's okay, now it's different at this point? Or is it just you've been in the office a couple of weeks, like the last month's been a little bit different? How discrete is it?
Yeah, I feel like we've had a couple of them already. The first one was, and you can just feel them. It's like when someone says, I've got product market fit, and people say, how do you know? And they're like, I can just feel it. Mm-hmm. I do believe that. And for us, at first we were dropping, I think, 500 units a month, not a lot. And they would go just days, hours. And then we made more units. And then all of a sudden, and we would run ads and it would just be so cheap and everything. And then at a certain point we hit a ceiling where it was like, okay, these aren't flying off the shelves after this point. Mm-hmm. And it feels like we've hit a slightly different customer base. And I think that's, as you scale, customers have different needs, right? And so you have the really high need, like low hanging fruit customer that is dying for your product. And then you shift a little bit, and then you have folks that they do need your product and they're quite interested in it, but they need more information and they need education. And then you have to shift your business again and say, okay, how are we going to communicate our value prop more clearly to the customer? And you go through that stage, and then you get through that subsection of customers, and then you get to the next one who don't even know that they need it or have a problem, but they do, right? Maybe they don't know that this is a solution. And so then you have to like put your net even wider and try and find those customers. So you just go through these stages of growth, and you can feel them because you start to feel this friction. And I think it's up to you and your team to figure out how you jump over that hurdle. And it's a different solution each time. It's
like in economics, they'll talk about the like movements along the curve versus a shift in the curve kind of thing.
Yeah.
So is it as simple as in identifying, are we at a point where we need to drive a shift versus we need to focus on a movement along? Is it as simple as like growth slowed down, we did a drop and we didn't sell out immediately? Or
totally, a little bit of that. Growth slowed down, get like way different customer service or way different comments on our Instagram with brand new questions, or trying to understand the brand a bit more, or people trying to peel back a layer. Something like that will feel, I try and train the team to look out for those shifts. And it's those things as well, not just our growth rate has slowed a little bit, but also there's like a different energy in the ecosystem, and how do we respond to that?
So this is going to be like the $1 billion question, because obviously it's always like at any of these points, it's what do you do is that's the thing. That's
Right.
like your job as an operator is to figure that out. But how have you, those kind of chasms that you've crossed, or these shifts along the curve, and from that perspective, how have you gone about figuring out what you have to do at that point to make that leap?
I think the biggest thing in understanding how to make that leap is talking to the customer, which sounds so cheesy because I think everyone says that you have to meet a customer, but I think if you ask people, they will tell you. And so I used the example before of people didn't understand, they wanted to learn more. And so we were getting more, to be honest, more vulnerable, more intimate questions from the customer. And those questions helped me understand what we were missing from our marketing materials, from our website, from even the packaging. So I forget what you asked, but
Just like how, I mean, I guess how you
How do you
identify
know?
what you got to do to
yeah,
cross
exactly.
the gap.
So talking to the customer, and then honestly testing and iterating, which is really annoying. And it gets more annoying the bigger you get,
Yeah.
for sure. But I try to do that. I take real separate time away from the team so that I can step out of the detail and do things like that. Because I think that test and iteration phase is what kills a business over time if you don't do it. And so it's trying to find an efficient way to do that while you're still scaling this beast that gets bigger and bigger over time.
Would it be fair? Like, I'd imagine there's a personal development aspect of that too, right? Learning along the way.
Yeah, 100%. And being pretty humble. Nothing will humble you more than a group of customers screaming at you about your product. So I think always assuming that I don't know.
Yeah.
And I do try to do that because I learn every day, not just from my team, but certainly from my customers and from the ever-changing environment all the time, right? There's so many different tools, there's so many different ways of scaling. And so trying to be open to those while sticking to my sort of true values of how I know how to build a business, I think is the key.
Is there anything specific that you're focused on learning now?
Yes. I think the dreaded AI conversation, investors ask me all the time, how are you integrating AI into your business? The truth is, in lots of ways on the back end, first, it's really hard to create a customer-facing AI type of product. There's lots of distrust in our community, and that is not a space that they really want to
Right.
lean into. But what I'm focused on now actually is I always tap into things that start to feel repetitive and start to feel like I might be able to scale them. And the thing that is repetitive right now is our customers' family members or our customers' parents DMing me or emailing me and asking me questions about our customer,
Huh.
which is really interesting.
Like specifically about this person, or about
Yeah,
like in aggregate?
Essentially, parents worrying about their children.
Okay.
And I guess because we have such a huge platform around their children and around the well-being of their children, we feel like a very safe and validated entity to ask the question to. And so I've integrated AI I've essentially scaled myself through AI.
Okay.
I've created an empathetic AI type of product that essentially you can ask any question confidentially to, and it will respond in a way that is aligned with for them's values.
How did you learn how to do that?
Autos.
Okay. That's amazing.
I did that through Autos. But yeah, essentially that's what I've been playing with recently. And it's thinking about, which is an unlock in my brain, because the sort of, I always think that you learn about your customer, you create intimacy, and you sell to them over and over and over. And that's what this business is. And for the first time in my career, I've stepped back and been like, can I serve the customer through another customer? And that's what I'm testing out right now, which actually breaks from everything that I believe in business building. But I think that is something I'm interested in testing. And I don't know if the answer is a good one yet, but that's what I'm focused on.
In what sense does that break from everything you feel about business building?
Because in my mind, what's the hardest thing? We've talked about this a lot, is acquiring the customer.
Yeah.
And once you acquired them, you have them, right? You have their email address, you can sell to them again, you learn more from them, you find out what they need. And so it becomes a thing where it becomes less expensive over time, right? And so I don't like to break away from our customer. I remember a good example of this is early on. So we patented our chest binder. It really well, flattens the chest, and it's amazing, right? So everyone's really happy. And then a lot of cis women with larger chests wanted to buy the product, which I'll never stop anyone from buying the product. That's fantastic. But someone said to me, why don't you market to them and sell to them? And to me, I'm like, that's not my customer. And that breaks away from this idea of boosting LTV and creating an intimate relationship that builds over time. And so I've always stayed true to, that's my customer, that's who I'm going to sell to, and they're who I'm solving the problem for. Whereas it's interesting to think about the parent of the customer who cares just as much, right, about the customer and their well-being. And is it valuable? This is the question I'm asking myself and the team. Is it valuable for us to solve their problem, the parent's problem, in order to solve the child's problem? And I'm not sure about the answer to that yet.
And when you think about the future of For Them, when there's so much embedded uncertainty for so many reasons, you know, I mean, it could be something as simple as like AI is going really fast. Who knows what things are going to look like in 2 years, or just general business stuff. Like it's hard to plan too far into the future because you don't know like what 10 challenges or problems you're going to encounter along the way. And, you know, going back to what you said earlier about not necessarily being someone that I think plans like too far into the future, not trying to make that sound bad. Tell me if no. But how do you, at the same time, I'd imagine like you go into these VC meetings, like they're going to ask you, what's the vision for the future? Where do you see it going? Or what does that future look like in your eyes? How do you think of it?
Totally. And let me be clear. I think a lot of VCs are pretty uncomfortable with how I built this business because I feel like I'm building a world. And I think VC is like a very simple, succinct story. And this isn't. It's complex and there's lots of facets to it. And I think that's how it scales and creates change. I really back the way that we're building it. But what do I see in the future is a multifaceted ecosystem that serves our community in whatever way that they need to be served. And I've always stood by that. I don't, you know, and that feels generic. And I don't think it is. I feel like also we're category, I do believe we're category creating, and maybe everybody says that, but I do believe that because the way that we're building, the way that we're serving the customer are essentially brand new. So there's lots of...
We got the cameo.
Yeah. Let me just see where she's going. Go on. Back here for this.
I have to leave that in the episode. At least in the video version.
So yeah, I do believe we're category creating. And so for me, the future is a huge, multifaceted entity that serves this customer in whatever way they need to be served.
That's awesome. Where can people find you?
Me personally?
You, For Them.
We have a million socials everywhere. On Instagram, for sure. At forthem.com. And I'm Kylo Freeman.
I'm going to get better at these outros over time.